This is episode 257 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, another big week here, a lot of public policy issues taking place, but a couple of big ones, one related to the presidential election and the other related to a long awaited vaccine for COVID 19. But today, it's Monday, the 14th. All 538 members of the Electoral College will be formally casting their ballots for president. And who knows how many faithless electors there may be. But it is important. The gears of our democratic republic grind on, and the Electoral College, we think, is a worthwhile aspect of United States democratic Republican values and procedures, and it's worth noting when they do cast those ballots, and assuming that all the electors go the way, or even a vast majority go the way that they were voted, we'll have President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris inaugurated here in January.
Yes, that certainly is what it looks like. If you're a betting person, overwhelmingly odds that Biden and Harris will be president and vice president. But it doesn't mean there aren't lawsuits going on, and there's still some activity with regard to that. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I think the more interesting thing than the results, because I don't think the results will change by any of those lawsuits, is will there be a movement afoot to basically make changes to the voting system so that there's more confidence? Because man, there's a lot of uncertainty. And what's interesting is that if you look at some of the things that the Republicans are saying and accusing, the election before, the Democrats were doing very similar things. So, you might say that, oh, this is just one-sided and partisan. But if you can remember back 4 years, there's a lot of things that similar concerns were raised 4 years ago. So,
Yeah, and there are a lot of pluses and minuses to our system. Of course, we do strongly support, and we had a conversation a while back on with a guest on the issue of the Electoral College and its importance to our nation. Trent England, he is at the Oklahoma think tank, and we talked extensively about the Electoral College and the idea of 50 state elections as opposed to one national election, and not only how that's just a better system overall, but also how it does help states like New Mexico stay relevant in these big elections for U.S. president. But yeah, it's a momentous day. And of course, we have many other momentous occasions, including an election in Georgia that'll really determine control of the U.S. Senate, as well as Inauguration Day in January and more. But another momentous occasion, the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, apparently today is the day. Again, it is shipping across the United States, and it's worth acknowledging that that was developed in record time, thanks in great deal, in part to the Trump administration allowing the FDA and the companies there developing it to have great flexibility in being exempt from numerous bureaucratic hurdles that often drag out the vaccine development process to 7 years or so, whereas this vaccine took, obviously 9 months ish, 10 months, depending on where you measure the exact beginnings of it. But I guess, Wally, we're nowhere near first in line for this particular vaccine, But if given the choice,
Although my gray beard makes me look even older than I am, Paul, I have my shutdown beard growing again. But yeah, so what do you think?
are you going to take it?
Yeah, in all likelihood, I will. So, that you bring up a really important point, though, is how long will it be until I am able to take it? That is a big question there. It's interesting. Boy, we're already seeing group after group after group say, "Oh, I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to take it." So, what does that mean for getting to this thing of herd immunity, which is necessary? A combination of people who've either had COVID or had the vaccine. If I still think that even with all of that, it will be the supply, not the demand for the vaccine that's going to slow things down, but we'll wait and see. So, yeah, in all likelihood, I will take it. I absolutely want to go and visit my grandchildren and, my children out of state. And, so I think I will do it. But again, when will I be able to do it? I'm guessing it will not be until after the middle of next year. I'm thinking, July at the very earliest, although we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with you. I would be more leery about being the first out of the chute to take it, but neither of us are healthcare professionals. Neither of us are among the very most vulnerable classes. You got me by a few years, but you're no longer in. Not exactly in the elderly class of people who are.
Well, I appreciate that.
But and neither am I, and we'll just see how it all shakes out. And getting here to New Mexico is another thing we haven't seen necessarily. The trucks roll up and people start receiving it here. But as long as things go well and there's no immediate issues, I mean, you can always make the argument that issues don't appear for years into the future. I'm not a anti-vaxxer or vax conspiracy theorist. I was vaccinated and have received them for many of the diseases, et cetera. The fact that it's been speedier than most, maybe is somewhat concerning, but as long as it seems to work for initial groups that get it, I'm sure 3, 4, 5 months in, we'll have a pretty good grasp on at least the initial safety of the vaccine. And the politics of the anti-vax groups are, and whether they're anti-vax or just skeptics, certainly folks on the Democratic side and even in the media made a big stink out of this being a Trump vaccine. And then philosophically, a lot of folks on the left are more anti-vax, as well as someone more the far right. So the polls say that there's a lot of folks skeptical about it. I do hope that it does not become a requirement for kids in public school, for getting on a plane, for getting into various countries or whatever. I think that would be problematic as another ticket you have to punch to get into X, Y, and Z. That would be a problem. But as long as folks are voluntarily given the ability to take the vaccine, then I probably will be inclined to get it at some point in the future.
Yeah, and then kind of looking ahead to the reality of the situation. There's been some discussions, including on this podcast, about the difference between dying from COVID-19 and dying with COVID-19. Well, if we're going to be giving the vaccine to some of the oldest and most frail individuals out there, there will be people that die right after they receive the vaccine. Sure. I guarantee it. It's just it's absolutely what's going to happen. And so, in this interesting, very quick media cycle that we're in, social media, how will all this play out? We'll have to wait and see, but I guarantee you that will happen. So the other thing is that, early on, I believe it was in Great Britain, there was somebody that had an allergic reaction to the vaccine. Well, that's, oh my goodness, an allergic reaction. Until you read even in the second paragraph of that story, this person has a lot of allergic reactions to a lot of things. In fact, they carry an EpiPen around, which is no shame in that. But It's there are, a vaccine is not 100% safe thing. It's just not. No vaccine is. The flu vaccines that we've been taking for years have side effects, have complications. All vaccines do, and the COVID-19 vaccine will be no different. And so it will be interesting to see how all of this plays out in the media, because that has been, I don't know what the polite word for it, but that has been a show that is. It really has been lacking. It's one of those. There's been a lot of hyperbole, a lot of weird factoids masquerading as facts, and I have a feeling when the vaccine comes out, we're going to see more of that, and we'll see if that actually slows down the acceptance of the vaccine, or if it just is more noise and people go about their business.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair to say that there will be some sensationalism around this. There's been a lot of politicization around the whole COVID situation, and there's no doubt that the efforts to eradicate or eliminate COVID will also involve a fair amount of politics. And, I just as an aside, I'm sure that the media and Joe Biden will be eager to talk about the success of how they're getting rid of the virus and how the virus is being beaten back, when it indeed is, by the vaccine that they essentially will have had nothing to do with in terms of its development. Now, I'm not saying that Biden couldn't have done the same exact thing if he was in the presidency, but so many on the media and on the left, and do I repeat myself, and including Democrats, have attempted to hang all of the virus, all of those deaths around Trump's neck. And I just suspect that there will be a lot less willingness to associate the president with what we all hope is successful effort to push back and get towards normal, with the vaccine leading the way.
Yeah, we will wait and see. If things go well, there's no doubt it will be all because of Biden's presidency, and if things go poorly, it's because of the hangover of the evil administration of Trump just slowing things down. But this is one of those things. Talk about everything being political. Really, I think the goal is to get the virus under control, get to herd immunity, get to where life can start to return to normal. And I think a vaccine is a big part of it. And I certainly hope that instead of playing politics, those that are in office right now, whether it be in Washington or Santa Fe or in cities and counties across New Mexico, are really working on the vaccine plans and making sure that that goes as well as humanly possible.
No doubt about it. And, while we are optimistic about the vaccine and hopefully the move to, move beyond and put COVID down, the governor has put forth plans here in New Mexico, Governor Lujan Grisham, to allow hospitals to ration care. Now, that is a term, when you talk about rationing, which immediately, in my mind, and I think a lot of folks' minds, leads to concerns, about the government picking winners and losers. Sarah Palin famously talked about death panels. Now, that's not exactly what we're dealing with here, but the term rationing is very fraught with regards to healthcare. And the governor is specifically saying here that the hospitals are full and overwhelmed, and that hospitals have the ability under this plan to decide what types of patients should be given priority to receive scarce medical resources. So in other words, we're kind of back at square one where we were back in March and April, where hospitals were essentially, if you needed a knee replacement and you were in line to receive one in the near future, not in line formally, but just in general.
Yeah, your knee's hurting. It's hard to stand in line if you need a knee replacement.
Well, especially at the grocery stores outside in 20-degree weather. But do I repeat myself there? The point being that this gives hospitals flexibility to deny care to folks who may otherwise need it. And I'm not saying that there's any better options. It is noteworthy that much has been made about New Mexico's relative lack of hospital beds. And you can actually go and find this such a ranking at Becker's Hospital Review, where you have states ranked by hospital beds per 1,000 people. The data is from March the 18th, 2020, so pretty recent. South Dakota has more hospital beds per capita than any state in the country, followed by North Dakota, ironically, and Mississippi, which normally New Mexico is right up there on all the bad things, and West Virginia is number 5 in terms of most hospital beds. We are indeed down very near to the bottom. By this report, we're not at the very bottom. We are actually tied with California and Utah, and Washington State and Oregon. Interesting something about the Pacific Northwest, not fans of hospital beds. But it's worth checking out that report, noting that, yes, New Mexico does lack in hospital beds. I do think it's a little bit inexcusable that we're here at this point where we could have done more over the last 9 months to address the hospital bed issue in the state of New Mexico.
Yeah, that is interesting, and it's interesting how if we look back at the rates of the virus and the death rates when things were shut down the first time, with the real fear, the almost palpable fear amongst many politicians that we were going to be overwhelmed, and then through the summer things were pretty calm, and it's almost like they say, we maybe don't need to worry about this. It's one of those things that's like, well, what do you believe? And so, it didn't seem like we made a whole lot of progress since March in terms of our situation. But the other point I did want to make, Paul, was in terms of, at some level, you see story after story about, intensive care unit, the number of beds being utilized goes up, is at a high level. Well, that happens every year. So that is just a normal part of the winter cycle that happens with the flu. And in this case, the flu's been replaced by COVID-19 because it seems as though that's the only thing people get now. So it doesn't mean that that intensive care units aren't used to more business in December than they are in the middle of July or August. It's to be expected. But your point is well taken, and that is, did we make any progress from March of this year? And the answer is maybe we did, maybe we didn't. They buy the old Loveless facility for an overflow facility. But then very quickly we get to the realization that you don't need as many ventilators as we thought, because ventilators aren't the answer that they initially thought they were. And then maybe it's not hospital beds at all. Maybe it's the people to man them, and the workers, trained workers, and allocating them the right place in the hospital system may be the weak link, not the quote unquote bed. And I'm just, from reading between the lines and the data that gets reported, it sort of seems like this quote unquote bed, it's not a shortage of beds, it's a shortage of trained personnel.
Yeah, and I read the Journal, Albuquerque Journal, cover to cover, at least all the relevant and interesting stories. And some of the most interesting
throw that in their face.
The letters to the editor column, and a gentleman wrote in, it is worth noting that medical professionals traditionally work something on the order of 12 on, 12 off in their shifts. They maybe that would be 4 days a week or something. But this gentleman said that he was a recently retired medical professional, and as somebody of a more advanced age, not interested in working 12 hours straight in a pretty stressful environment, he said, if these people, the medical establishment, as it were, state, Prez, Loveless, whoever, said, look, you can work 6 hours or 8 hours or something, that he thought that there would be a lot more professionals available to man, and supplement the other people involved, as well as I think we have a lot of people being trained in UNM Hospital because it's a training school, as well as our military installations. And I'm not saying that all of these are tickets to having a much broader group of people to choose from, but it certainly seems that those are at least three options for expanding the number of medical professionals. Because I have heard the same as you have, Wally, that there are enough beds, but the Loveless facility could have been upfitted for that kind of thing as well. So anyway, it is, we've learned a lot at this point that we didn't know before, and one would have hoped that we wouldn't be in this situation, whereas maybe back in April or May, we might have more of an excuse. So,
well, yeah, and then just one real quick thought with regard to there are a lot, if we're not doing any of these procedures that can be put off, there ostensibly should be healthcare professionals that could be freed up to do other things. Well, big bureaucratic systems like the healthcare system don't necessarily move people from one classification to another very easily, even if they do have many of the skills, if not most or all of the skills necessary. So there is a lot of that involved. And so, yeah, we will see. I have a feeling that, that when you have record numbers at the top, that they tend to come down. Well, they have come down. It's still not a good situation now. But, knock on wood, have we seen the highest rates of infection and death and hospitalization for the year? The answer is, we will have to wait and see, but it is possible. And yeah, because the warm and fuzzies about if this thing were to go up another 50%, it does seem like that New Mexico in particular, a healthcare system could be in a serious real world of hurt.
No doubt about it. And hopefully with the vaccine on the horizon and being distributed as we speak, that it won't get any worse than it is today. But it'll take a lot of time for that distribution to occur and for real herd immunity from the vaccine. Not that herd immunity can't be developed the old-fashioned way, so to speak, but definitely having the combination of people who have been exposed to it and contracted it, perhaps as well as the vaccine, that could really up our herd immunity as a state, as a nation, and the world. Now, Wally, gosh, it was last Monday evening, and since we record on Mondays, we gave a last preview to Albuquerque City Council and voting on mandatory paid sick leave, but we would be remiss if we didn't note that the council pushed that back for 60 days from that date to February the 1st. This is welcome news, frustrating, I'm sure, for folks representing the restaurant industry and other industries who would love to see this thing killed outright, but I just don't think this city council in its current political dynamic is going to outright kill mandatory paid sick leave. It seems like they may be kind of waiting for the legislature to take up the mantle on that in the upcoming session, the mandatory paid sick leave issue. But here we are, and yet another delay on plans for mandatory paid sick leave at the city of Albuquerque.
Yeah, and the other thing that will be interesting to see is they're going to be related to all of this. Will there be more money flowing from Washington to businesses to help with the incredible economic damage that's been done by having to be shut down? And will that include some form of federal sick leave like there is in place right now through the end of this year? It seems like there's maybe, I'm not the best Washington prognosticator, but from what I read, it seems like there's maybe a little more willingness to work together to get things passed in Washington, and that could certainly be an important one, because right now there's just this huge mixed message out there. Businesses are failing left and right, and in fact, there's money at the state and at the city of Albuquerque and in municipalities across New Mexico where money is available to help these businesses try to keep from going out of business. and they're giving them money at the same time they're putting in, or at least considering, policies that might make it more likely for them to go out of business. So maybe the answer about waiting is a good one, and I would have a feeling that it might be good policy even if you really, really want it at the state level. It might behoove the state legislators to put that on hold for a while as well, because I think if December was the month of the COVID, I have a feeling long about tax time this next year, we're going to see a large rash of small business bankruptcies and closures, the likes we haven't seen, maybe ever in New Mexico from a percentage point of view.
Yeah, no, it could get very ugly out there for businesses, and that's whether this comes down at us from the state or local governments. I don't think there's any doubt that a lot of folks in Santa Fe would love to see this happen. The legislature, taken as a whole, is just as progressive as the city council and the mayor. There's no reason to believe that they wouldn't impose this kind of policy. The only thing holding them back at this point is, well, if they were to do some kind of legislative shift where they come back in the summer or spring and just do the budget in the traditional session time frame here in the wintertime, or if some policy, some realization took hold that we just can't do this because of COVID. But it strikes me that that's unlikely to happen. These folks haven't exactly shown much sympathy to businesses throughout this process. You don't see many Democratic legislators out there saying Lujan Grisham's being way too tough on these businesses. There's businesses in plenty of these Democratic represented areas, but when it comes down to the way she's handled things, even though we're now past the election, haven't seen a lot of active questioning, especially among Democrats, of the way this has all been handled.
Well, I have heard a lot of, what shall we say, muted under their breath grumblings, none of which that make it into the paper. These are personal conversations. Sure. I think there is some frustration out there, but it certainly hasn't broken through into the public or into the media.
No doubt about that. All right. Well, speaking of COVID and the governor's response to it, an article that if you just look at the headlines, which we encourage, obviously people need to look beyond the headlines when they are consuming media stories, because it is easy to miss the forest from the trees, so to speak. But there was a story that talked about PED's budgets being held steady at approximately $3.3 billion for next year. But the real story is at the very end, when it quotes New Mexico's PED Secretary Ryan Stewart, Secretary in exile. I think might be a good way to describe him. He's pretty much been hanging out in Philadelphia the entire time COVID has been going on. But he was quoted as saying, "I think we are going to be back in person in the fall of 2021, which is a simple way to say we are not likely to see most schools in person in New Mexico until next fall, until this school year is over and the summer, and then getting into next fall." So that is not surprising to me as a parent who has made the decision to homeschool his children, along with my wife, who was on the podcast last week. But you hear a lot of stuff. In fact, my wife is still involved in the school that we had our kids in, and she said that many of the teachers and even the principals were under the impression that they were going to be going back to school in the not too distant future. And yet here we have the secretary. By not too distant, I mean like January couple weeks into the calendar year. So, but Ryan Stewart seeming to say, look, we're probably going to not have any in-person schooling this year. Now, I'm sure he would love to see that go a little quicker, but that is what I believe is realistic based on the governor and her handling of the crisis, her statements along with David's graces, and just the way that, the science says our children should be in school, but that's not the case here in New Mexico. So,
yeah, and the 2020-2021 school year will go down in the history books as the year of lost education. Mm-hmm. So, it is sad, but, certainly, as you alluded to, I don't think that's unexpected given the other policy things. So, and in a state with New Mexico that struggles with academic achievement from its students, it's going to put us further behind. And so, I would like to, frankly, see the legislature start to address that as well, as recovery for businesses, which is huge and we've already talked about. But what are we going to do for academic recovery? What policies and procedures are we going to put in place to make up for the lost year? Now, the brightest kids, the kids with good computers, with a good learning environment, a lot of those will be fine. A lot of those were fine before COVID. They'll be fine during, and they'll be fine after. Some other students that don't learn as easily and aren't as advantaged from a technology point of view and have, even access to a computer to do things, where are they? And, the answer is a lot of them are truly lost. The public schools have lost track of tens of thousands of them across New Mexico. But a lot of them that are there, the grades that are being received are plummeting, which means the learning that's being received is plummeting. And I'm not one of those that, believe me, you can write in if you want. Grades are not the only measurement of academic achievement, but they are certainly highly correlated to the ability to do a subject is to get a good grade in it. And when we see the grades go down, that means that the learning's not occurring at the rate that we certainly would wish they would be.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And as the parent of children who got pulled out of their school beforehand, it'll be interesting to see how my kids, if and when they reintegrate into the traditional school system, how that is all handled. Because, of course, as parents, we don't want our children to be, performing at a very high level, whereas the rest of the students, should they reenter their grade, that they are just sitting there twiddling their thumbs versus jumping into another school year with a brand new cohort and all those kinds of things. This could be the straw that breaks the back of the age cohort oriented educational system. I don't know. I've been thinking a lot of things. I've thought that we were going to have large scale civil disobedience in response to the ongoing lockdowns. I've thought that people would kind of react negatively to paying all the money they do for the education system, not just here in New Mexico, but around the country, and essentially not getting it. I've thought that a lot of people were going to be a lot more willing to be outraged about the situation, and it just hasn't materialized so far. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how they handle it as a school system, both at the state level and at the more district level. And speaking of one of the quote unquote solutions, Las Cruces Sun News, Las Cruces Public Schools to offer free Wi-Fi to students in school parking lots. What a great system they have in place down there in Las Cruces. So you now have free Wi-Fi if you want to take your lessons. Now, thankfully, Las Cruces is not, the coldest place in New Mexico. We're not talking about Angel Fire, I suppose. So but your family.
Yeah, Towski Valley.
Yeah, driving into the lot or maybe hanging out outside, even on a cool day here in Albuquerque. Las Cruces is relatively warm and balmy, but just not not a good solution. And boy, yeah, let's go stand in the parking lot or sit in our car in the parking lot and try to learn. Doesn't work out very well. So, yeah, there's the education issue is right up there with the economy as one of the things that, as we hopefully begin to move beyond the COVID crisis, there's going to be a lot of pieces to be picked up, both in human terms as well as just fitting things together to make the system work again, however that system looks. And hopefully there are changes to the system for the betterment of education and economic policy moving forward.
Yeah, because unless I'm badly mistaken, I think that we will absolutely see progress in 2021 through the middle of next year with COVID going away. But I don't think victory will be declared in the middle of 2021. So as we go into the fall, are we going to reach a level that, that the governor and the teachers unions are comfortable? Leave it to the Babylon Bee to encapsulate issues. I saw their headline that says teachers unions oppose vaccine because it may require them to teach. And so it's one of those things that how long will that go on as we get to the fall of 2021? Will we actually have in-person instruction again? Which a lot of states continue to have that to this day. New Mexico certainly is not one of them.
Yeah, and if there is a group that has not acquitted themselves particularly well in this whole situation, it's not the teachers themselves. I know of plenty of teachers who are very interested in getting back into the classroom and teaching and working with the kids, and we've even had personal experiences with that. But the unions have been just atrocious, and I just can't think of a group that deserves to be abolished or to lose whatever standing they had built for themselves in some people's minds as advocates for the students, as opposed to simply advocates for more money, more benefits, et cetera, for not just educators, but the bureaucracy more so, because a lot of that spending, and we've seen studies, we've talked about studies, there's been a lot more spending in K-12 over recent decades, but it hasn't necessarily gone to the teachers. It's gone to hire bureaucrats and people to push papers around. So the whole education bureaucracy and the unions themselves, which prop it up, need to be addressed forthwith. Now, in terms of the economic situation, the challenges that we face, Wallet Hub came out with their latest report. This is from December the 10th, 2020, of course. And you can find more out at errorsoфenchantment.com. We placed the report, a link to it there on the date it came out. And New Mexico is one of the states that continues to see the most elevated unemployment claims. Biggest increase in the latest week versus last year. So you're talking early December. We are second. For some reason, Kansas. I don't know what Kansas has done or not done on the virus itself, but Kansas is the worst. We're second. Illinois, Indiana, and then Colorado is in the top 5. States that have done the best, seeing the least increase. And remember, New Mexico comes at this from a relatively high unemployment threshold. We're one of the states that even in good times has relatively high unemployment.
Yeah, we tend to be a full percentage point or two higher than the national average, typically.
Right. So the smallest increases, Wyoming, New Jersey, South Carolina, South Dakota, and West Virginia, which, again, that's an interesting mix because Wyoming's a fairly unaffected state relatively with the virus. New Jersey's been the number 1 most effective state by the virus. South Carolina, another red state, relatively unaffected. Of course, South Dakota, famously, Kristi Noem has kept them rather open. And then West Virginia, which again, in many ways resembles New Mexico economically and socially, is relatively lightly impacted in terms of the increase over year. And same general trend is true when it comes to, since the start of 2020, New Mexico is second right after Kansas. and many of the same states appear on both sides of the ledger. So it's just another indicator, and there are so many of them, of how the governor's attempts to get the virus under control in New Mexico have resulted in economic carnage. And by the way, unsuccessful attempts. And before I throw it over to you, Wally, I will go to the worldometers.info. Typically, New Mexico's been between 20th and 25th nationwide when it comes to deaths per million population, which is, I think, the most relevant statistic we have to measure the health impacts of this virus, because, of course, that's separate from the economic carnage. New Mexico is now up to 19th. So we are, and technically that's 18th because District of Columbia gets lumped in there. So they're at 14th. So we're creeping up that list a little bit in terms of the death rate from COVID-19 in a direction that is not favorable to our state. But just indicating, re-indicating, reinforcing New Mexico's response to this situation has not done much to alleviate the virus.
Yes, and then, one of the things is I look at the data both nationally, and then there's like a microcosm of that in New Mexico. Is it's less so now in the last couple months as the virus has taken off in many places across the United States, but for the first part of the pandemic, New York and New Jersey drove the U.S. numbers. In New Mexico, largely San Juan County, McKinley County drove the numbers in New Mexico, and now that's changing as well. So what happens is when you have these true hotspots that are just so disproportionately high, then it gives you it just gives you a false sense. What's the saying? Lies, damn lies, and statistics. Well, when you take averages across a country and it's so dispersed to places that have still to this day very low numbers, and again, on the national side, they do it per million. We only have 2 million people in New Mexico, so I'm much better doing it per 10,000 or 100,000. But there are parts of New Mexico that still don't have that high of rate per 100,000. Me, including Bernalillo County, our rate, because most of the population here is not that high. But again, you look to San Juan and McKinley County, and their rate, based on their population, extremely high. So now, kind of to tie two concepts together, and I think it will, but will the vaccination strategy kind of tie in to that as well? So the places that are really, can we get a lot more benefit maybe in San Juan County and McKinley County, slowing the spread of COVID by putting disproportionately more vaccine there than other places? I don't know, but these are the issues now that the vaccine is available that are going to need to be addressed, and hopefully are being addressed right now.
Yeah, in our upcoming podcast with Dr. Dean Waldman, we talk a little bit about the issues and kind of strangeness in many ways of the spread of the virus itself, and how different ethnic groups are more or less susceptible to it. Just really interesting stuff. It's definitely going to be worth your listen. They're released on Thursday. Finally, over the weekend at Spaceport America, there was supposed to be a test launch of the new rocket that they're trying to use to send people out into space. Per a Santa Fe, New Mexican story, Virgin Galactic space flight hits snag after southern New Mexico launch. Basically, the mothership worked fine. Of course, that's just a glorified 737 or whatever. Not really, but
yeah, it's a jet plane.
Yeah, it's a jet plane. We've got that technology fairly well conquered.
It's been around for a while.
But the plane that they are supposed to launch into space from that jet, literally dropping it out. It says the ignition sequence for the rocket motor did not complete. No injuries, no deaths or anything, but definitely another setback at Spaceport America. notably, and guess what? We're going to have him on the show again soon. But Doug Messier of the flight blog Parabolic Arc, he's really looking at the commercial space flight industry, manned commercial stuff that Elon Musk and others are doing. The website's Parabolic Arc. He was interviewed just over a year ago in 2019, November. He says, he talks about the engine and how there are issues with the engines that they are using in the spacecraft that Virgin Galactic has down at Spaceport America. It burn a combination of nitrous oxide and rubber, and that is causing issues. And he did say at the very end of that podcast that he would not, and this is a space junkie, space expert who presumably has never been to space, but when I asked him whether he would go to fly with Richard Branson if given a free ticket, he said no. So that is an indicator based on the safety problem. So he said, I offered him 5 minutes to talk in more detail about what happened, and I think he's got sufficient information to say that he wanted to speak for the entire podcast. So we will be talking to him soon about this issue. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but to say that yet again, as if Charlie Brown were being encouraged to kick that football by Lucy, the football has been pulled back, and who knows where that will take us at Spaceport, New Mexico.
Yeah, so the final question before I turn over you to take us away is, would you rather have a COVID vaccination or a ride at the spaceport? Which is going to be more dangerous?
COVID, no question.
Both, yeah, that's me too.
As much as I would enjoy a trip into space, the COVID thing is going to free up my life in so many ways to do the things I was already used to doing. And I'm hopeful that someday, I'm relatively young, and that someday maybe Elon Musk or one of the other guys who are doing a maybe better job than we've seen out of Spaceport America, that I would be able to get into space at a relatively low cost. But at this point, I'm going to take my cues from the experts. And if Parabolic Arc says I'm not going into space with him, I am not, Paul Gessing, going into space with Richard Branson. But we will talk to him soon. And thanks for listening to this week's show. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episode on Facebook and Twitter, and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.